Hi, I'm Robert Hoffman with ITI, and we're talking innovation with Congressman Pat Tiberi of Ohio, who's also the chairman of the House Ways and Means Subcommittee, Select Revenue Subcommittee, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Excellent, which means you are at the epicenter of tax reform and changes in tax policy. So, in fact, let's dive right into that. Could you give us a little bit of a sense of where you see things playing out in terms of process on tax reform, and also what principles will you be bringing to the discussion on tax reform going forward?
Well, obviously, first and foremost, under the leadership of Chairman Camp of the full committee, we'd like to make sure that we don't see rates skyrocket for businesses and for individuals, because at the end of the year, as you know, we're going to see rates go up for everybody, businesses, individuals, all individuals. Some new taxes in addition to that, in addition to the 01-03 tax cuts expiring. So first and foremost, we would have hoped at this point in time to have gone deeper into comprehensive tax reform, but unfortunately we haven't been able to. Not for a lack of trying in the House with a couple dozen hearings and a lot of work behind the scenes, but clearly it's not going to happen between now and the end of the year. So first, let's do no harm. Let's make sure that current rates can stay the same going into next year. So a one-year extension that gives us some time in 2013 to really reform our tax code. And so we have to extend the current rates and give certainty to entrepreneurs and investors that we're not going to see a huge, large tax increase on January 1st. So that's the first principle, is make sure that we have a status quo. In addition to that, what we have really focused on with respect to tax reform and comprehensive tax reform is to make a tax code that's not as complex as our current one. And we've heard the complexity issue from multinationals to individual entrepreneurs to just individuals. The complexity of the code, so streamlining the code, making it simpler, and quite frankly, making it more pro-growth, so we can actually get more revenue coming into the federal government. And we believe that's a doable goal that if we're working together with the Senate and the administration, that we can accomplish that if we all focus on the goal and keep the politics out of it.
Well, that's great. And just to take each of those principles in turn, when you talk about extenders, obviously a lot of our member companies are very dependent on a couple of key extenders in order to remain competitive. You know several of them. The R&D tax credit, first and foremost, has been an important ingredient for our business success and also innovating in the United States. But also in terms of being able to compete overseas, the so-called active financing CFC look-through. Is it your belief that those extenders are part of that one-year extension out that you were talking about earlier?
Well, so again, under the leadership of Chairman Camp, he's asked me to kind of focus on the extenders issue. There's 103 extenders that either recently expired or will expire at the end of the year. And historically, they've just been lumped together and extended.
Right.
There's no question that there are some extenders that are better than other extenders. And when I say better, they are more focused on job creation, economic development, more national in scope than maybe regional in scope. And so the broader based ones, and I think R&D is one that everybody acknowledges, is broad based, it's job focused, it's one that has universal support, versus others that might still have advocates out there but are more regional and whose value in terms of job creation and economic development might not be as noteworthy as R&D, for instance.
Right.
And so the task is to try to separate the good from the bad, or the strong from the weak, and have a bill. But again, because of timing, this probably is not going to happen until after the election.
Sure.
And then there'll have to be consensus with the Senate and the administration. So different track than the 01-03. Our statement on the 01-03 would be, when we passed them, and we passed them several times 10 years ago, is that we wanted those to be permanent. The extenders, whether they were initially passed in the 1990s or a few years ago, were not to be extended permanently. They were temporary.
Right.
Now, another aspect of what Chairman Camp has me looking at is, hey, if this is a good extender and has been a tax measure that we deem as one that's good for growth and good for the economy, maybe it should be part of comprehensive tax reform. And so you have that other component to it, but in the short term, at least, they're on two different tracks, and the extender bill, at least from a logical process argument, and I'd love to have the extenders done a year ago,
right,
for the purposes of investment and certainty for people who are out there using them. But the reality is today, nothing's going to happen in terms of the end game until November.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. Also appreciated the fact that you, as one of your principles, put an emphasis on pro-growth tax reform, and that's something that we think for the tech industry certainly rings true. You've probably heard from a number of our member companies at ITI about the complexity. You talked about that certainly, but also other elements of the current code which we believe are inhibiting that growth and inhibiting our ability to compete. The high corporate tax rate, I'm certain now we are now #1. Not something to want to be #1 about, is the corporate tax rate, but also the global nature of the tax system. We're now one of only a handful of countries that have a global tax system. So a number of our members are advocating for competitive territorial reform, and that's been obviously the subject of much discussion and debate back and forth from the political campaigns to the editorial pages of the New York Times and Bloomberg. Are these elements that are part of what you foresee as being part of the discussion when we think about pro-growth tax reform?
Absolutely, and unfortunately, because of where we are today, in the summer of 2012, before an epic presidential election in November, it becomes part of the political debate.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, as a Republican who is for a comprehensive reform that not only lowers rates for every American company, whether they do work abroad or whether they just do work at home, a territorial system for our multinationals are critically important. But you have rhetoric on the political end that talks about shipping jobs overseas, which is a powerful message, a powerful rhetoric that the president's using in his campaign. And coming from Ohio, we've seen this now for the last 7 months on TV, and nothing could be farther from the truth. And I'll give you an example. So in Central Ohio, where I'm from, Limited Brands is a outstanding corporate citizen.
Absolutely.
And one that is mostly domestic, but now has begun selling Bath and Body and Victoria's Secret products around the world. And that process is really at its infant stage, but it's it's starting. The benefit is that ultimately, if they can get their business, and the potential is great, to grow internationally. And the more products they sell in Europe, and the more products they sell in Asia, the more products that they sell in South America. And you all know where the markets are, and the markets are growing. When you look at the BRIC countries, and Russia and Brazil and India and China, suddenly you have, ultimately, since this is a headquartered American company that's in Central Ohio, the best jobs of that company are where? In Central Ohio,
exactly.
In my district. And you don't have to look too far at the university, at the United Way, at the library, things that create great quality of life for our community. The people who are mostly involved in those issues are executives from our headquartered companies, including Limited Brands. So when you go to Ohio State, you go to the Wexner Hospital.
Right.
The chairman, CEO, and founder of Limited Brands. When you go to Children's Hospital, it's the Nationwide Children's Hospital, Nationwide Insurance, headquartered in Central Ohio. So the profits that the Limited Brands hopefully will make, and they'll be large by selling their products overseas, trying to compete, by the way, against other companies who have a tax code that's much more favorable. That's why we have to change our tax code, one of the reasons why we have to change our tax code. But the profits that come back due to selling those products overseas will actually end up creating more jobs in Central Ohio to support that that role that they're playing by selling products overseas, whether it's in the accounting department, whether it's in the legal department, whether it's in the tech department, across the board. Good paying jobs, and you got the executives there. So it's a no-brainer, but unfortunately the politics of it, we don't do as good a job as the other side does in terms of shipping jobs overseas, and your members can help with that as well because they have similar stories.
Absolutely. In fact, you hit on two really good points. First, the relationship between success overseas and how that translates into jobs at home, that there is actually a positive correlation between that work and that investment in foreign markets where 95% of the world, 95% of the consumers are,
right,
and how that translates into job growth. In fact, there was a study in 2009 from some noted academics at Harvard and Michigan that showed that correlation, and that's the first key point. But the second one that you ended on, the ability for us to cut through the rhetoric and provide the real case studies, the real stories, and the real academic analysis is, we have to provide that in order to help you, Chairman Camp, and others get to the crux of the issues and help push forward the kinds of reforms that we're looking for in tax reform. So we definitely want to work with you on that.
You know, I just wish that more members were just open to what's out there in the world. I have family in Italy, a ton of cousins there, and had an opportunity to go there as a kid. I was last there a year ago, and you look at all the particularly younger folks, you know, in their 20s and 30s, who have iPhones and who have tablets, and it's just blossoming out there. And so every one of those that's sold there, it should be a benefit to us.
Yep.
And that's why the territorial system is so important. So we can have American companies bring back those dollars and reinvest here in America, and hire more people here in America at the executive office and the corporate office.
Well, you touched on technology. You're a congressman, you're a father of 4 daughters, so you're outmanned, so to speak, in that regard. Right. What technology helps you both at home and in the workplace? Are you a tablet, smartphone user, and how do you use technology, especially with young girls who are experiencing technology in classrooms and, you know, with their friends?
It is pretty amazing that technology has really come so far so quickly. Even in the time that the decade that I've been here in Congress, the use of technology has just been overwhelming. But so for me, who my family lives back in Ohio, I can FaceTime with my 9-year-old daughter, and it's phenomenal to think that you can do that today. But looking at a 9-year-old use technology today, or a 3-year-old actually knowing what an iPod is, or knowing, saying iPod, or saying, can I look at your iPad? Really, I mean, that is just incredible. And to know that this innovation is occurring with a lot of smart Americans, and what we should do in Washington is actually let them do more. And that happens by having a tax code that makes sense and having a regulatory environment that makes sense. And what frustrates many of us is the world is so big that if we're not smart about this, we could see some of our innovators leave and go somewhere else, rather than kind of flipping it around and saying, not only should we encourage our innovators to stay here because of the environment, both on the tax side and the regulatory side, really encourages them to do that, not just their love for America, but that we should be looking at all the rest of the world and saying, hey, there's some smart people over there, and there's some smart people over there, and they have a pretty darn good tax code and pretty darn good regulatory environment. We should make it ours better to make them think about, if I'm in Asia or I'm in Europe, and those Americans, man, they figured it out, how to have a regulatory environment and a tax environment. Maybe I should go there and be part of that. Maybe I should take my company and go to the Silicon Valley or go to the East Coast and headquarter there, because they know, their government leaders know the importance of having a tax code and a regulatory environment that's good for business. That's the debate we should be having.
That's very true, and we really appreciate the innovative approach that you're taking to the tax reform debate. It's very helpful to us and enables us to keep innovating right here in the United States and creating jobs. So again, Congressman Tiberi, I want to thank you for joining us today. Again, this is Robert Hoffman with ITI, and we've been talking innovation in the tax code and in our companies, and we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.